Leviticus, introduction. I'm guessing if I asked you what your favourite verse was in Leviticus, you probably wouldn't have one. For many Christians, Leviticus isn't a go-to part of the Old Testament. It's probably not your favourite book of the Bible. It's a book that Christians tend not to know very well, but actually there are some important things that we need to notice here in Leviticus. You'll remember that the book of Exodus ends with a number of chapters that deal with the construction of the tabernacle, all of which leads naturally to the opening chapters of Leviticus, which take place in the tabernacle and are all about how God is to be worshipped there. In other words, Exodus ends by emphasizing where Israel was to worship God, but Leviticus emphasizes how Israel was to worship God. The English title of the book, Leviticus, means concerning the Levites. Remember that the Levites were one of the 12 tribes of Israel, descended from Jacob's son Levi. This was the tribe that God had given the task of serving in the tabernacle. And just one family of that tribe, the family of Aaron, were set apart to serve as priests in the tabernacle. This book mainly focuses on the role of the priests, but there's a phrase that's repeated throughout Leviticus that shows us that this material wasn't just for the benefit of the priests. On a number of occasions, Moses is called to speak to the Israelites, showing that the book was meant for all the people of Israel. One writer says this: Leviticus is a fairly appropriate title for the book, for it deals largely with priestly matters. But he says it is equally, if not more, concerned with the part the laity should play in worship. Most of the laws apply to all Israel. A key verse is Leviticus chapter 11, verse 45. God says this: I am the Lord, I am Yahweh, who brought you up out of Egypt to be your God. Therefore be holy, because I am holy. This book is all about the holiness of God and how that holiness should be respected and copied by his people, whether in the tabernacle or in everyday life. The book divides into 4 parts. First of all, there are laws in Leviticus 1 to 7 about sacrificing, laws about sacrificing. And in these chapters, we have 5 types of sacrifice that are mentioned. First of all, burnt offerings. Second, grain offerings. Thirdly, fellowship offerings. Fourthly, purification offerings. And then finally, guilt offerings. Then in chapters 8 to 10, the second part of Leviticus, then the priesthood is discussed. Then thirdly, in Leviticus 11 to 16, there's a discussion about purity, about what it means to be clean or unclean, what it means to be holy or unholy. And then finally, the fourth section, there are laws about holiness in everyday life in Leviticus chapter 17 through to 27. Now, one chapter that we must particularly take note of is chapter 16, which describes the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur, as it's sometimes called. Look at slide 1. Read Leviticus 16. What happened on the Day of Atonement? Please pause the video here to answer the question. Read Leviticus 16. What happened on the Day of Atonement? Well, on just one day each year, Aaron the high priest could enter the most holy place of the tabernacle, or the Holy of Holies, as it's sometimes called. Here he would make atonement for the sins of the Israelites. On that day, the people of Israel were to fast and not work. On that day, the high priest would purify the whole tabernacle. No other Israelite was allowed into the tabernacle at that time. There were very strict instructions about how Aaron should enter, what he should do, what he should wear. First, he was to make a sin offering of a young bull to make atonement for his sin and for that of his family. Some of the blood of the sacrificed bull was then sprinkled on the atonement cover of the Ark of the Covenant over the stone tablets with the law inscribed upon them in the most holy place. Then the high priest brought 2 male goats from the Israelite community, and by casting lots decided which would be sacrificed as a sin offering for the people and which should be made a scapegoat. This goat was sent off into the desert on its own. The goat chosen for the sin offering was killed, and again some of the blood was sprinkled on the atonement cover, or the mercy seat as it's sometimes called, in the most holy place. The priest would then lay hands on the head of the other goat, the scapegoat. He would then confess the sins of the people over it. And the sins of the people would symbolically then be removed by sending it away from the people. The goat would be taken by someone to a remote place and then released. Finally, the carcasses of the animals used for the sin offerings were burnt outside the camp. But let's think for a moment about the importance of Leviticus for Christians. Well, the book contains the second of the great commandments quoted by Jesus from Leviticus 19:18, love your neighbour as yourself. According to Jesus, all the law and the prophets, that's the whole of the Old Testament, hang on this command and the first that he gives from Deuteronomy, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. In 1 Peter, the Apostle Peter quotes from Leviticus as he calls the Christians he's writing to reflect God's character. Be holy because I am holy, God says. It isn't just Israel that's called to a life of practical holiness. Christians are too. In general terms, the sacrificial system described in Leviticus teaches us that God is holy and that his people must be holy too. That sin is serious and that it separates people from God. That sin can only be dealt with by death. But that God in his grace accepts the death of a substitute as payment for sin. Specifically, the book of Leviticus sets the scene for the death of Jesus as the one who ultimately takes away people's sin. The book of Hebrews presents Christ as the perfect and final high priest, as well as the perfect and final sacrifice. It particularly draws on the imagery of the Day of Atonement that we looked at earlier from Leviticus 16 to describe Christ's sacrifice. The writer calls us to go to Jesus outside the camp. Hebrews shows us why Christ's sacrifice is superior to the sacrifices of the Old Covenant described in Leviticus. Jesus' death is presented in the New Testament as a sacrifice that brings perfect and complete cleansing from sin, and so does away with the need of any further animal sacrifice. The New Testament makes clear that apart from Jesus himself, there is no special class or group of people who must mediate between Christians and God. Now we have Jesus as our great high priest. We have no need for any other priest.